You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 21st of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from Zurich, this is The Globalist. I'm Andrew Mueller. Coming up,
the golden age of America begins right now.
Seconds out, round two of Trump versus the world and versus established norms, conventions, etc. We'll have the latest from Washington, D.C. Also ahead, the first major diplomatic set piece of the new U.S. administration as the foreign ministers of the Quad gather. Later in the show, we'll review the morning papers and check in with our correspondent at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Plus,
we've always been about people pleasing and making people happy and giving them incredible experiences that you won't get every day.
We meet the DJ hoping to bring the high-end sauna to the British High Street. And we'll meet the director of the International Radio Festival. All that and more coming up on The Globalist, live from Zurich on Monocle Radio. But first, a look at what else is happening in the news. Aid trucks have begun to enter Gaza under the terms of the ceasefire which began on Sunday. Tanzania has recanted its earlier denial of an outbreak of Marburg virus, but insists it will overcome it. And Mozambique may be edging towards a government of national unity following October's still disputed elections. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. But first, depending on the view one takes of developments, today is either the second or the 1,459th last day of US President Donald Trump's second stint in the White House. The 45th president was sworn in as the 47th president yesterday afternoon, Washington, D.C. time, in a ceremony moved, for weather-related reasons, into the same Capitol rotunda ransacked by his supporters a little more than 4 years ago. In his inaugural address, somewhat more upbeat than the American carnage oration of 8 years ago, Trump promised what he described as a revolution of common sense. Well, I'm joined now by Monocle's senior news editor, Chris Cermak, in Washington, D.C. Chris, what was your view of proceedings? How close were you actually able to get?
So, Andrew, as you can imagine, like many people, given that the festivities were moved indoors, I was with the various Trump supporters who had descended upon Washington, D.C., creating in itself quite an extraordinary scene for a otherwise liberal city, looking for places to watch for all of the festivities. I ended up in something of an institution in Washington, D.C. called Carmine's. It's an Italian restaurant and bar. And this was one of the sort of impromptu inauguration watch parties that were set up right between the Capitol and the Capitol Arena. So kind of what might have been the parade route, or the way that Donald Trump was traveling. The parade, or the motorcade route, was right outside where I was. And I just kind of joined with other Trump supporters who were cheering, booing throughout the entire festivities on the television. And these are people who kind of streamed in because they could not get anywhere else. So in that sense, it was a good call, if I may say, on my part, not being able to get into the official festivities. Of course, so many didn't, which was the issue. So many people were just kind of roaming the streets that came into the bar afterwards saying, we've been looking around for hours. We weren't able to find a place. We tried many ones. We stood in many lines. In the end, they ended up watching it on television. That was unfortunately the only thing you could do.
Was there any sort of anger or even miffedness expressed by any of these people that they had spent a lot of money and come a long way only to find things moved where they couldn't see them, and with no prospect of their hero giving them any of their money back?
You would hear it on occasion. There was some grumbling, some comments along the lines of, it's not that cold, but it was pretty cold. I'm going to say that sitting for a few hours, particularly if you're walking around, maybe you're okay. If you're sitting for a few hours outside, that would have been pretty dreadfully awful. So generally there was an understanding, and there was very much a celebratory atmosphere among Trump supporters who had descended on Washington, D.C. from all corners of the United States. And I spoke to many from abroad as well, Irishmen, British, various people who had also descended on D.C. So no, really a celebratory mood, I have to say.
And did you get a sense overall of what it was they were actually celebrating? I mean, with Trumpism, it's always unclear whether they are positively in favour of his policies and so forth, or whether they just see this whole thing as a means of putting one over on people they dislike.
No, I think there were a number of policies and different things that they were in favor of when you speak to many Trump supporters, to be honest. And you could go a little bit through that by seeing the kind of things that, watching the inauguration with them, where they cheered, where they were particularly happy, and where they were not. And we can go through some of the various policies that Donald Trump announced. But they were very positive towards, of course, his immigration policies, drill, baby, drill, and his sort of focus on energy and getting domestic energy and oil going again was a big one. His comments about there will be two genders from now on got huge applause. Also, I should say his comments on the military and kind of ending wars, that the military should be, judged by its success by ending wars or not getting into them. That was also something that people appreciated quite a lot. And naturally, his America First rhetoric in general, his announcement of an external revenue service to bring in tariffs, bringing back free speech to the United States. Another one that I think was quite striking to me, because it went back a ways, was his promise to give full back pay to anyone who had lost their job or not been able to work because of the vaccine mandate. That got a huge crowd response as well. And otherwise, some people I spoke to, one woman I spoke to was quite striking, because I think she talked about the need for America to have a leader who is willing to offend. And she meant it in the sense of kind of the way that Donald Trump does, that, everyone has been taking advantage of the United States for so many years. We need a leader who can bring, even for that matter, peace in the world by being willing to offend and do those things that nobody else does. So no, you really have people there who understand who Donald Trump is and want to see him do big things in the next 4 years.
Well, let's talk a bit about that speech then. How would you say it differed from his previous inaugural?
Well, it's interesting, I have to say, Andrew, for a couple of things. One thing is, I think it's important almost to say that yesterday was such an extraordinary day. And there were so many different speeches that you almost can't focus on the inauguration speech anymore because of the many comments he gave. After that, he spoke then to the overflow room right outside of the rotunda on the Capitol, where he gave more of a sort of open speech, which he said was a better speech than the inauguration speech that he gave. He then held an extraordinary session with reporters while he was signing executive orders, where he really looked comfortable in his own skin and talked about a number of different issues, and we can talk about some of those. But so I guess that what I would say is the inauguration speech was a very confident president, comfortable in his own skin, as he seemed to be throughout the day. He was holding back, though, somewhat in that inauguration speech. There was talk of unity. There were all these various announcements that he made on some of those policies that I talked about. I think the other thing that was striking, perhaps, was even in that setting, he was incredibly aggressive in attacking Joe Biden and the last 4 years, and then making sort of extreme promises about how everything would be completely different under him. That sort of contrast as he laid out his various policies, I think, was very striking compared to even 8 years ago. But just generally, I think the confidence that came throughout the day, whether he was speaking from a pre-done speech or his off-the-cuff comments, it just really came through for me that he really knows who he is at this point, like him or not, and he is going to, he is happy with who he is and what he is doing in the White House this time around.
Chris, you have one thing to play for us. This is commentary from somebody you spoke to.
Yes. So, I mean, one of the things that was interesting, as I mentioned, over these the last day or so, was the different sides of Donald Trump you saw, and also in the executive orders, the record number of executive orders that he has passed throughout. the day that looked at so many different issues, whether it was pardons and commutations for January 6th, rioters, for example, about 1,500 pardoners there, leaving the Paris Climate Accords, leaving the WHO as well, his talk of immigration and mass deportations. And one of the questions, I think, going forward is just how aggressive he really is going to be when you look at his rhetoric versus his actions. And I spoke to Matthew Dalek. He's a historian, professor of political management at George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. And here's a little bit of his thoughts.
One of the key unanswered questions for the next few days, and frankly, next 4 years, is how far is Trump going to go? Where is his energy and focus going to be? Now, and it can switch from day to day, of course, but it's one thing to do a roundup of criminals who are in the country illegally, right? And it's another thing to do mass deportations. It's try and send the military into cities like Chicago and New York. Same thing with tariffs. His rhetoric would lead you to believe that he was going to go do all of that, really kind of go to the max. He was going to be a maximalist president in his actions. But, being maximalist has its costs, and those things are not necessarily why he won the office. So I think that kind of tension on a range of critical issues is going to be something to watch.
And Andrew, to jump off of that, maybe some of the other things I spoke to with Matthew Dalek was this idea of retribution as well, because he has promised to sort of end the weaponization of the Department of Justice and so on and so forth. And that is another question, open one at this point, about how aggressive he is going to be about that. How far is he going to go? Joe Biden took some steps by pardoning his own family, pardoning Anthony Fauci and other people for crimes they had not committed, sort of pre-pardon, if you will, for these people. That was something that angered Donald Trump tremendously. But it'll be interesting to really see whether he wants to invest a lot of energy in the kind of things when it comes to remaking the Justice Department, and whether the courts, for example, will hold up, whether he wants to go after people for actual, trying to go after crimes that he believes they committed, even if they don't hold up in court. So there are a lot of open questions about how aggressive he's going to be with some of the, frankly, conspiracy theories that he's been talking about through the day as well.
Chris Cermak in Washington, D.C., thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Globalist, live from Zurich. It's 18:12 in Canberra and 8:12 here in Zurich. I'm Andrew Mueller. This is The Globalist, and the first substantial diplomatic set piece of President Donald Trump's second term begins today in Washington, D.C., when the foreign ministers representing the other three members of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, that's Australia, India and Japan, are due to meet their US counterpart, newly confirmed US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. While it is reasonable to assume that not quite all of the guests are delighted to find themselves dealing with a restored Trump, the concerns of none of them about the Pacific region, China in particular, have dwindled since he was last in the White House. Well, I'm joined now by John Nilsson Wright, Senior Lecturer in Modern Japanese Politics and International Relations at Cambridge University, and by Maya Sharma, a journalist based in Bangalore. John, to you first, do we anticipate that the Quad might actually become a bigger thing during Trump's second term? Because this was one of the few international constructs he seemed quite fond of the first time.
Yes, and I suppose if you think about what the Quad's principal goal is, which is to deal with the challenge of a rising China, in so many different respects, militarily, as an economic security rival. And when one thinks of the efforts that the Biden administration made to use the Quad as a mechanism for strengthening alliance partnerships, seeking ways to coordinate more effectively with India, Japan, and Australia, and when you look at all of the different initiatives that have developed in recent years, particularly the strengthening of the US-Japan relationship or the agreement over AUKUS, there's plenty of substantive heft within the wider framework of coordination when it comes to dealing with China. And of course, Donald Trump has made it very clear that he sees the threat of China, and particularly this is confirmed, I think, by some of his key appointments, not least Marco Rubio, a very clear China hawk. All of this would suggest that at first glance, there should be a strengthening of relationships. But of course, this is all happening in a context when some of those key partners, perhaps most notably Japan, are very worried about a transactional Donald Trump and how that might upset the bilateral relationship with Tokyo.
And Maya, to bring you in from Bangalore, is it fair to assume that amid the Quad, India might feel it is now at a bit of an advantage, given that it does already have a somewhat more Trump-friendly government than the other two countries?
Yes, you did mention that many people would be a little worried perhaps about the return of Donald Trump. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi has always had good relations with Mr. Trump, and India is perhaps not as worried as others about what lies ahead. And also in the context of Quad as well. I think India is very happy that the Western democracies seem far more comfortable dealing with India rather than China. It is an advantage for India when it comes to this. India, of course, received very well when Narendra Modi actually went on his last official visit to the United States. And there has been a growing closeness between the United States and India. And at this point of time, as I said, I think probably India not as worried as other countries about Mr. Trump's second term.
John, there's obviously going to be an element of getting to know you going on here when the foreign ministers meet Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but do we think they will be discussing anything substantial? Because one thing that did happen during Biden's term was that the Quad very much emerged from just being what might have been a talking shop. They did do stuff like, the coast guards of the four countries beginning joint patrols. So might military interoperability between the four of them become something they want to work on?
Well, it's a logical area where there should be more coordination. But I think probably the critical question here is how much is enough? How much in terms of defense coordination and defense contributions by, let's face it, America's junior partners, and Donald Trump sees the world, I think, in hierarchical terms. How much will they be able to contribute? For a country like Japan, which under previous leaders substantially increased its defense expenditure, one of the key worries is that with the decline in the yen and with the government itself a minority administration, Prime Minister Ishiba is not popular. He's having to make deals with partners in the Japanese Diet. Donald Trump will know that he's weak and that he's vulnerable. And he may seek to extract an extra pound of flesh in the defense space by asking that Japan does more. And the question is whether it can afford to do more, given its demographic challenges, given its economic problems at home. But of course, Japan also has acute worries about China. China's incursions into the territorial waters near the so-called Senkaku Islands is the source of great concern. Public opinion is very worried about China. And of course, this is all happening at a time when America's other key security partner in the region, South Korea, is in the midst of an immense political upheaval. The Biden administration made a great deal of progress in strengthening trilateral ties between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. Those may unravel, and there are big question marks about how Donald Trump is going to work with North Korea, which, of course, is another security threat that the Japanese worry about. So I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot of discussion about how to sustain some of those mini-lateral security partnerships, which of course complement the work of the Quad.
Maya, you mentioned that India likes to trade on the fact that the Western democratic nations get on better with it than they do with China, and for fairly obvious reasons. But nevertheless, is India not wary about being drawn into any sort of arrangement where it is perceived as part of the Western alliance? Because India has traditionally been very, very wary of looking like they're on anybody's team in particular, and of course their concerns about China are different from the other members of the Quad because they have a land border.
Absolutely. Yes, India has had a long history of being non-aligned, trying to balance, trying to walk that delicate path between the Western powers and, say, Russia. And that has been clear even in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. India has stopped short of condemning Russia as much as the Western powers have. Prime Minister Modi, of course, has famously hugged Putin. He also hugged Zelensky as well. But definitely India not as hostile towards Russia as perhaps the West would have liked them to be. There's a huge connection with Russia when it comes to defense supplies and other areas as well. So yes, India would not want to be seen to be so close that it would affect its relations with Russia. That is a delicate path to be walking. And in terms of China, absolutely, the long border between China and India has seen quite a bit of turmoil in recent times, with even clashes between troops of the different countries. India and China have been trying to kind of sort things out. They have had meetings on this, and there is work going on at the border to reduce hostilities, to try and make the conflicted areas peaceful once again. That work has started, so there has been progress made on that. But certainly India has had issues for years, for decades with its neighbor, and is perhaps even more personally affected than the other countries by what China is up to, keeping a very close eye on China indeed.
And John, finally, and just very, very quickly, I want to come back to that point you raised about Donald Trump wanting Japan to do more. Is it possible that Japan could try to leverage that to its advantage in terms of becoming a more normal country where maintaining a defence force is concerned? This has, of course, been a dream of one or two Japanese prime ministers, notably the late Shinzo Abe.
I think that appetite for trying to do more in the defence space and become a more conventional security actor, both regionally and globally, will continue if it can be sustained financially. We come back to the constraint of defence expenditure. And in all of this, of course, we shouldn't forget that if Donald Trump slaps 60% tariffs on China, that will also have an impact on Japan. Japan not only has to worry about direct tariffs on its own exports, but of course its own heavy engagement in the China market is a source of concern. And we've already seen the Chinese, who I think recognize some of these challenges, reaching out to Japan, also to South Korea. There may be an effort to try and stress this importance of using economic engagement as a way of distancing Japan from its committed dependence on the United States. And there are certainly some people within Japan who would make that argument.
John Nilsson Wright and Maya Sharma, thank you both for joining us. You're listening to The Globalist live from Zurich. Still to come in today's show, the DJ bringing the posh sauna to the British High Street.
There's plants all around the area. There's birch branches holding up this beautiful festoon lighting, so it's got a little bit of a circus vibe to it. It's quite theatrical.
This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio, live from Zurich with me, Andrew Mueller. And let's continue now with a leaf through today's newspapers. And joining me from our London studio to assist in that endeavour is the political journalist and author Terry Stiasny. Terry, there's probably a certain unanimity, I guess, in terms of what people have chosen for their front pages today.
Yes, pretty much. Looking through the front pages, obviously, the Trump inauguration is the main story, and a couple of the papers, the Times and the Financial Times, are picking up on the line from Trump's speech where he's saying the golden age starts now. I've got to say both of them put that in sort of quote marks, so they're not, absolutely believing that the golden age of America begins now, but that's certainly the line that they have chosen to pick up on. And a couple of the other newspapers, The Guardian, for instance, also have Donald Trump saying, I was saved by God to make America great again. But I should give probably a dishonourable mention to the Daily Mail, who has their columnist Boris Johnson, of course, the former Prime Minister, who, let's say, was not always well known for his absolutely accurate news reporting back when he was a journalist. And the bit that they've picked out for their headline is, "As the pulse of power surged from the battered Bible into the hand of Donald Trump, I saw the moment the world's wokerati had worked so hard to prevent." And I think as people sort of a bit nearer to the inauguration might have noticed, while Boris Johnson was a bit further back in the crowd, I don't think his hand was actually on the Bible at all. So, Boris Johnson, very, very reliable reporting there on the front of the Daily Mail.
Hard to imagine, of course, why Boris Johnson, of all people, would get that excited about the prospect of a political comeback by a populist leader with somewhat unruly hair and a diffident relationship with verifiable reality. But is there a sort of consensual tone among the newspapers, I guess, on the spectrum between excitement and trepidation?
I think, a lot of them seem to be saying, OK, well, the Financial Times is interesting. They're saying their comment says the speech invokes regime change vibes rather than the usual transfer of power. So apart from the FT using the word vibes, which is quite unusual for them, I think a lot of them, there's a bit of caution. Certainly in The Guardian, as you would expect, because they're sort of generally on the left, they are talking more about the executive orders and the things that are actually happening already. And I think that's quite common looking across Europe at the newspapers. The Figaro, for instance, in France, yes, they are using that golden age line, but very much the French and German papers picking up on climate change, on pulling out of the Paris agreements, and on all this sort of flurry of executive orders. So people wanting to look quite quickly at, what is he actually doing rather than just what is he saying.
Well, let's take a look now at a story which might be making front pages in the UK were it not for this other thing that is going on.
Yes, I mean, to be fair, it is actually pretty much sharing the front pages, I would say. So some papers like The Sun, for instance, are very much leading on the story of Axel Rudakabana, who suddenly entered a guilty plea to the killing of 3 young girls in Southport, which happened during the summer. And this was expected to have been a long trial, but because he suddenly entered a guilty plea, we now can hear a lot more details about this. He attempted also to kill 10 other young girls. He possessed ricin, and it turns out that we can now report after he pleaded guilty that he had also been referred to what's called the Prevent programme here in the UK, which is a programme that is designed to prevent people getting involved in violence or in terrorism. But the Home Secretary has already announced an urgent public inquiry into this, because it seems as though the state may well have failed because the killer had contact with the police, the courts, the youth justice system, and so on. And Keir Starmer is going to be making a statement about this in about an hour's time. And one of the things he really has to do is try and explain why a lot of these details couldn't be reported while the trial was expected to be going ahead.
We should take a look at the coverage of Germany's looming election as well, because it seems that the Friedrich Merz, who is probably going to be the next chancellor, he is the Christian Democratic Union's candidate, has, I think, as we would say, gone there where Alternative for Deutschland is concerned. He said that 1933 is enough. I mean, this is a pretty big bomb to drop in the context of German politics.
Yeah, this is pretty significant, and this is Friedrich Merz, and he was, the Times is reporting, he was speaking to a campaign event in his hometown. It said this is going to be a really decisive election, saying that, if you don't shift further, the AfD might win in potentially 2029 or 2033. And it's really interesting how he's trying to address what he sees as the danger of the far right. He's saying the belief that you can tame far right populists and bring them to reason, to their senses, and make them responsible partners in government has already turned out to be a great fallacy once in German history. And again, evoking 1933 once in 1933 is quite enough for Germany. So this is quite a shift in his strategy, rather than saying, look, these are dangerous far right people and we won't have anything to do with them. And he is, comparing them with the situation in Austria and in other European countries. But they do seem to be very concerned about, what is the best way to tackle the risk of the AfD without, drawing more attention to them. Because previously they've been thinking of really trying to say, let's not mention them very much and kind of hope that they go away.
Finally, in this morning's papers, Terry, and this does both pain and unsurprise me as an Australian to discover that our querulous cousins from across the Tasman are trying to claim credit for things again. And this, I think, is this is even more outrageous than Kiwis claiming they invented the pavlova.
Well, this one, everybody is trying to fact check Donald Trump, and it's a difficult task at the best of times. But New Zealanders are particularly upset by Trump saying that the US split the atom, because they're saying, well, this is all the things we did, and they're saying no, this was ours. This belongs to Sir Ernest Rutherford. We did that, although he did do it in England. So they're slightly trying to claim a bit more of the credit, saying that this actually happened in 1917 in Manchester and not, of course, in the United States. But New Zealand is saying, can we at least have credit for this one thing rather than giving the credit to America? And I think the mayor of Rutherford's hometown has invited the US ambassador to New Zealand, once there is one, to come and visit the Lord Rutherford Memorial in Brightwater so that they can keep the historical record accurate.
Similarly, Terry, I would point out that Crowded House were formed in Sydney. Terry Stiastny, thank you for joining us. You are listening to The Globalist live from Zurich. Here is what else we're keeping an eye on today. US President Donald Trump has pardoned around 1,600 people imprisoned for their participation in the attempted putsch to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The order undoes one of the biggest investigations ever undertaken by the US Department of Justice and ends many prison sentences imposed by Trump-appointed judges. Aid trucks have begun crossing into Gaza under the terms of the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, which began on Sunday. At least 1,545 so far. While the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip appears to be holding, there has been an uptick of violence on the West Bank, where Israeli settlers have attacked Palestinian homes, businesses and vehicles. And UK civil servants are to be introduced to a set of artificial intelligence tools which, in theory, will make their work easier, more efficient and cheaper. In what may prove a more astute joke than is as yet appreciated, the AI suite has been named Humphrey, after a character in the well-loved sitcom Yes Minister, who devoted his working life to thwarting innovation and obstructing progress. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It is 2:31 in the morning in Washington, D.C., 8:31 in the morning here in Zurich, and as President Donald Trump relearns how to get an outside line from the Oval Office, the first major diplomatic forum of his second term is underway not far from here. The World Economic Forum is gathering in Davos. Gathering with them is Carlotta Rebello, Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, who joins me now. Carlotta, was there anything on television last night?
Nothing of note, Andrew. No, I don't know why you would be asking. No, but yesterday, the inauguration, is quite interesting to see how one event can turn an entire town and a collective group of attendees basically into a collective watch party. Davos was taken over yesterday by simultaneous watch parties, all of them with their own remit. And so you'd go to the Ukraine House, and obviously then there would be a panel discussion about what Trump's second presidency might mean for Ukraine and the support for Ukraine from the United States. AI House also had one. The Washington Post was organizing a watch party at a Hard Rock Cafe in Davos, and there were several happening, and all of them needed some drinks afterwards. So you make of that what you will.
I mean, at the event you went to last night, what was the general vibe? The second time that word has appeared on this morning's show.
I don't know what they're doing to you in Zurich, Andrew, but the general vibe was somber. So the event that I went to last night was not an official watch party. I did dip my toe into the one at Ukraine House, but after that, and after the Monocle Daily, I went to the media reception. This is the official one by the World Economic Forum. And of course, everyone was talking about the inauguration, even though that was not the theme. So that already tells you a bit about how things were shaping up, and everyone was discussing discussing what this would mean for their own markets. I overheard a conversation between journalists from German media, different outlets, discussing like what this might mean for Europe. And it was interesting just to hear, even in how events that have nothing to do with it, this was the main theme. But the reason why we were there wasn't just a welcome to the journalists, but also to meet the Crystal Award winners. Now, the Crystal Awards are the annual awards that go from the World Economic Forum, that go to 3 cultural leaders who are being recognized for their contributions to the world, for shaping society for the better. This year's winners who were there in attendance was the fashion designer and philanthropist Diane von Furstenberg, the architect and also social activist Riken Yamamoto, Japanese Pritzker Prize laureate, and David Beckham, who's a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and an advocate for children's rights. And he was talking about his work with children around the world. So it was quite a nice moment to have, to reflect on some good work that's been done around the world, when before that all eyes were on the bit of the dread of what might come in the next 4 years.
Well, later today we are anticipating hearing from some of this year's Davos headliners. Who are the big names speaking?
Yes, today the big speeches and the big names start arriving into town. First up, we have Ursula von der Leyen speaking this morning. Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is also speaking today, as is South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa. Interestingly, not delivering a speech, but in a conversation, is Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, and that's already an oversubscribed session, and I'm sure all eyes will be on there. Olaf Scholz is also speaking, and so is Friedrich Merz. And then, as we know, Xi Jinping is not here, but China's vice premier will be in town. So these are just some of the high-ticket names today, and that should start to paint a picture about what the world is setting out as the priority for 2025, and perhaps early official reactions to Donald Trump's speech last night too.
And finally, Carlotta, I believe that an attention-seeking corporate entity is distributing free hot dogs.
Look, Andrew, I actually have to give credit to Uber on this one. I haven't experienced it yet myself. So Uber is giving out free hot dogs for those who are working late. So this is at the Uber house on the promenade from 10 p.m. So actually, I think there needs to be some credit here, because it is difficult, as you probably have found out from our late arrivals into Zurich Airport. It is difficult to find food after a certain hour in Switzerland. So there's a lot of people who are working late, and if at 10 p.m. there's somewhere that's giving you free hot food and a beverage, I'll take it.
Carlotta Rebello, thank you for joining us. We will, of course, hear more from Carlotta on The Briefing later today at midday London time. For now, this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. The popularity of the sauna ritual is looking to rise again in 2025, with pop-up saunas emerging along coastlines and rivers around the world. However, one international DJ has been making it his mission to bring the luxury sauna experience to the high street at a reasonable price. Monocle's Tom Webb joined Rob DeBank to find out why he bought his Scandinavian-inspired wild spa experience slow-mo to King's Cross in the heart of London.
It's not really your typical pop-up, so it's not kind of a down at heel kind of gritty pop-up. It's quite smart, isn't it? So we're here for 6 weeks. It's 2 Lithuanian wood-fired saunas, 4 different ice baths of differing varieties, all beautifully laid out by my wife Josie, who's kind of creative director of this thing. So we've got hot showers, we've got handmade changing rooms with portholes in, beautiful sort of towels and sheepskins and stuff. So yeah, it's a real haven of tranquility in King's Cross.
And from the moment you arrive, you are absorbed in that tranquility. It is absolutely stunning here, from the lighting to the sound. What is your approach? What's your idea of wellness?
Well, I suppose me and Josie are probably best known for starting Bestival and then Camp Festival. So we've got a real festival background, and with my radio background and stuff, we've always been about people pleasing and making people happy and giving them incredible experiences that you won't get every day. And that's really what we love wellness. I'm a meditation teacher. We've been practicing yoga and meditation for kind of decades together, so that's always run alongside our more hedonistic music and festival thing. And now that's taken centre stage, and this contrast therapy thing that we love is what we want to we're sort of trying to disrupt that scene and take it to the masses, I suppose.
Because the scene exists, there are a lot of people doing this, but your approach is not your typical sauna. Where have you got these from?
We've sort of taken, I suppose, the traditional Finnish and Scandinavian sauna and then injected it with some sort of 21st century British, eccentric, slightly different, arty, festival-y sort of vibe, so it's difficult to describe without seeing it. I realise we're on radio, so very difficult to get it across to the listener, but it's got a real colour palette. There's the sort of rusty oranges and the browns and stuff that Josie's come up with. It's got a beautiful logo, which is very, very slow in itself. There's plants all around the area. There's birch branches holding up this beautiful festoon lighting, so it's got a little bit of a circus vibe to it. It's quite theatrical. There's a massive giant hat teepee that was sat just outside, which has got a fireplace in it. It feels a little bit like a ski chalet. So there's lots of different things happening.
Now, for the saunas that aren't permanent structures, they usually favour an ocean or a river. Why have you brought it to the heart of London?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, because that's actually normally what we do. So our two permanent sites are on rivers and oceans, like you say, most on the south coast. So King's Cross got in touch and said we're running an initiative called Mind Your Brain, which is about brain health, mental health, and making that better. And would you like to come and do a sauna pop-up? So that's why we're here, actually. It was their idea to do this, and it's so popular. We've only been here 2 days. This is kind of day 2, and people are stopping and saying, wow, this is amazing. Oh, I can't wait, I'm going to come back. And to have this opportunity to essentially, you could be in Helsinki or Tallinn in Estonia, or in a Russian Banya, or any of these places that we would never maybe normally get to. So it's a little taster of that.
It's genuinely jaw-dropping. When I was reading about it, I've read the words pop-up and for charity and for accessibility, low price point. Really was expecting a radiator in a wooden structure. And I'm knocked out by what you've achieved here. What's driven you to make this experience accessible, and what's driven you to donate to this charity?
Yeah, I mean, so King's Cross, they want to be running things that are accessible to not only, business people that might be in the area, or tourists or shoppers that are coming through, but to the communities that actually live here and in the sort of surroundings. So yeah, it's priced really, really pretty low for a sauna experience, £9 and £12 at peak, which is still, obviously, I know maybe a lot of money to some people, but for a sauna experience, then it's kind of on the reasonable end. So that's why it's kind of a good price. And then we're supporting Calm, the campaign against living miserably, to bring awareness to that amazing charity that not only for men but for women also, just looking at how the state of our mental health, and how that ties in with getting in a sauna, getting in the cold water, doing this practice for yourself makes you feel good. It makes you bond with people. You might be sitting in a sauna with a total stranger, 10 minutes later you're laughing and having you've totally got out of the frame of mind you might have been in before. So super important as well that we support charities like Calm.
I've spent £25 on a radiator in a hut, so £9 is incredible. And then talking about the wider experience, the drinks that you're serving here, the music, what makes this so different?
Yeah, I mean, so Slow-Mo, our little tagline is Next Generation Wellbeing, and it's, we do run, obviously, saunas and ice baths, but yeah, I'm a meditation teacher. Josie teaches shamanic Kundalini. We run music festivals. We do music curation. I've got a record label. There's lots of different strands to what we're doing. I mean, here on site we've got our own slow-mo shroom, Japanese green tea with lion's mane mushrooms in it, which we've just launched today. We've got a CBD drink with Intune, so that's a slow-mo limited edition. So yeah, I don't know, we're so busy. We just love sort of trying to bring new stuff out. So lots of great things to try here for the first time.
That was Rob de Bank in conversation with Monocle's Tom Webb. Rob de Bank's slow-mo experience runs at King's Cross on Lewis Cubbott Square until March 2nd. You're listening to Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You are listening to The Globalist live from Zurich with me, Andrew Mueller, on Monocle Radio. Let's take a look now at what's making headlines in the world of travel and transport. Gabriel Lee is our transport correspondent. He joins me now from Stockholm. Gabriel, first of all, many of us are obviously accustomed to delayed flights, but one Saudi startup is having a difficulty with actually delayed planes.
That's right. And this is happening across the industry, of course, but it's hurting new startups, new ambitious startups like this one especially. So this is Riyadh Air, which is a new startup meant to sort of come together with this big project that Saudi Arabia is embarking on, part of which is to really boost tourism. And so they want to make an airline to basically compete with the other big Middle East carriers, turn Saudi Arabia into a global aviation hub with 100 aircraft, 200 destinations, that kind of thing. And they're just struggling to get their first aircraft. So they've had to delay their launch to later this year at this point. That's what we're looking at. And it has to do with all these supply chain issues and this and that, plus Boeing's obvious troubles. So they're waiting for these Boeing 787s to come in.
Do we have a sense yet of how big a deal Riyadh Air wants to be? Is it content with competing merely, obviously, with Saudi Air, or does it want to be thought of in the same way that Qatar, Emirates and Etihad now are?
They absolutely want to occupy that space that Qatar, Emirates, and others in the region do. They want to do much more than Saudia does, which is very much serving people. And they do connect people through Saudi Arabia, but really it's an airline for people going to and from Saudi Arabia, right? Their connection operation is not so massive, and Riyadh Air really wants to change that. Not only bringing tourists to, being a kind of a more tourist-friendly airline, bringing them to the country, but also just, shuttling people across the world, much like Emirates does right now. They want to play in that same league.
Do we know what they plan to do about their passengers from various godless Western countries who may fancy a drink in flight?
As far as I understand, they're planning to make it much like how Emirates and Qatar do, having full bar service and the sort of not what you would expect from a Saudi Arabian airline, making it much more sort of friendly to Western tourists and the like.
Well, on the subject of those Middle Eastern airlines, you have been attempting to fly on the brand new Emirates A350. This is a relatively new addition to the Emirates fleet. What can we expect from it once it's been sort of properly, synced into their routine?
Right. Yeah, this is going to be a big part of the future Emirates fleet. And this was also actually, they had to delay this a few times. And they finally launched flights between Dubai and Edinburgh. That's the first route it's been doing to Europe earlier this month. And it's basically, it's an evolution of Emirates product. Emirates hasn't been going for big, flashy new products in the way that some other airlines have. They're kind of content to do their thing and sort of improve on it bit by bit. So it looks like a very nice aircraft. I'm actually flying it later today. So I'll be able to report back, but it will be a big part of their future fleet, especially as they're waiting for another Boeing 777X, which has been delayed not only because of supply chain issues, but especially because of certification issues, part of Boeing's larger, numerous issues. And they really want to get that plane, but it will be a while still. So the A350 is filling some gaps in the meantime.
I mean, does this A350, as far as we know at least, tell us anything about the future direction of the competition between the big Gulf airlines? Are they just trying to get more and more luxurious in a bid to appeal largely to high-end customers?
I think that's a move you see across the airline industry, and the Gulf carriers obviously are famous for sort of providing this certain level of opulent luxury, not always deserved. I think Emirates sort of, rides the halo effect of its A380s, which have first-class showers on board in the air, things like that. This aircraft is much less like that. It hasn't got any bells and whistles, really. It's got just a nice, comfortable business class. It doesn't even have first class. So this is not necessarily, every route that's going to get this sort of super high-end treatment, but it does look like it's very nice, a very comfortable way to fly. And the A350 is a beautiful airplane to fly as a passenger in general. So,
well, let's look now at what United Airlines are up to. You could almost start to perceive patterns in the sudden interest that they're taking in Greenland, but I guess this is coincidental.
Well, that was actually launched before all this about Greenland, was in the news, the latest things. But I think United has a sort of, independent of political considerations. I think United has the most ambitious route planning of any U.S. airline right now, and they're going for sort of more ambitious, more bold choices. They're not guaranteed to work. And they just recently put on a sale a flight between Tokyo and Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, which is another example, just like flying New York to Nuuk in Greenland. It's a bold move, basically, to try and sort of really expand beyond the usual. You see most U.S. airlines doing transatlantic, for example, they're flying to Rome and Paris, So this is nice to see them sort of shaking things up, trying something different.
I mean, you are right that these are niche routes. I mean, it almost looks like they've chosen a few of them by wanging darts at a map of the world. Is it clear where United would see the mileage in flying between Mongolia and Japan?
Yeah, well, in this case, it's interesting because, a few decades back, you had the U.S. airlines, in many cases, had huge operations out of Tokyo to Asian destinations. And that sort of went away as we got longer range aircraft and we got more solid partnerships with local airlines that could do the flying for them. But United right now, they have a hub in Guam, which is a vestige of a previous airline that they took over. That hub is not doing that well in the South Pacific. It's not very profitable at the moment. So they're looking for other places to put these 737s. And one experiment, it seems, is to sort of restart this idea of having a hub in Tokyo for shorter range flights within Asia and using these 737s, which are quite economical to run. So it's an interesting experiment to watch, and I'll be interested to see how it goes.
Gabriel Lee, thanks as always for joining us. You are listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio, live from our studio here in Zurich. And finally, on today's show, the International Radio Festival debuted here in Zurich in 2010, reaching over 50 million listeners worldwide at that very first edition. Dubbed the United Nations of Music Radio, it now has editions all over the world, most recently supporting the Saudi Media Forum. Its founder also manages Swiss Radio Day, the largest and leading industry meeting of the Swiss radio industry. And joining me now is the International Radio Festival Director, Daryl von Daniken, right here in our studio. Daryl, welcome to The Globalist.
Good morning, Andrew.
Well, tell us first of all a bit about Swiss Radio Day this year. What's it actually going to involve, entail, etc.?
Well, the Swiss Radio Day is all about bringing the Swiss radio industry together. It's the one day when the public and commercial private sector leave their boxing gloves at home and are all pulling in the same direction and celebrating radio. So it's just really to update each other on what's going on, where radio is going, the challenges and opportunities, of course, that radio offers.
At the risk of offering up any spoilers, do you get a sense in advance of this year's event where radio is going? What are the trends that people will be wanting to discuss?
Well, radio is your reliable mama cooking the pasta tomato sauce. Radio is radio. Radio is the most obviously audible of all media. It's the only media you can consume whilst doing something else. And it kind of gets forgotten a bit, but it's taken a lot for granted. So I think that that rediscovery radio is happening across many sectors. In fact, very interestingly, also across Gens Alpha.
I want to talk a bit about this thing you're doing with the Saudi Media Forum. What does that actually involve? Because to put it mildly, this is not a country which has been known as a bastion of free expression.
Exactly, and that's what they're trying to change. the country really is opening up. They have obviously a very media-savvy young generation. Half of the population is under 35 years old. All the channels are open, and they're wanting to bring media to the people, so to speak, not only to get people into media, but also to get business into media. They've got a lot of flagship events coming up, just like other developed countries, and they want to be having their own to be servicing this sector.
But even as the Saudi government recognises that they do have that rising young generation who are more connected to the world and probably more curious about the world, do you have a sense of how tightly they plan to, I guess, regulate, such media as they do permit, how careful they're going to be about it?
That's a good question, and I think McDonald's is only as good as the last hamburger they sold, I suppose. And what we have experienced is that it's very encouraging the way that is developing.
Let's talk as well about the International Radio Festival. What are we expecting from that?
Well, it was going very strong right up until the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic put a close to that because it involved a lot of travel from all four corners of the globe. But we're looking to ramp it up again, maybe bring it to the Middle East.
I mean, do you see, though, in retrospect, the pandemic, not that it was a golden age for much, was actually kind of a boost to the idea of radio worldwide? Because it was certainly our own experience at Monocle, as we kept broadcasting throughout it, that we saw a huge uptick in listenership and also direct engagement from our listeners. People were all of a sudden writing into us much more than they previously had been, obviously for want of anything else to do.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, radio, don't forget, radio is in the now. It's all about storytelling. And, we learn to hear before we learn to see. And we learn storytelling whilst we learn to walk. So I don't know about you, but I got here quite easily, and I don't remember having to learn to walk. So storytelling is all about communication. It's what you and I are doing right now. And we're all making our own pictures. So during the pandemic, we had a lot of time to be preoccupy ourselves with ourselves. And so listening to others and being able to converse with others was yes, a golden moment, I think.
But in terms of radio right now, as somebody who listens to a great deal of it and is very much invested in it, what is exciting you most, other obviously than appearing on The Globalist here in Zurich?
Well, of course, I'm thrilled to be here, Andrew, obviously. I think it's just a question, like I said, it's rediscovering radio as part of the media mix. We don't only eat muesli in the morning. We have a varied diet. At least that's healthy to have that. And I think in today's over-digitalized, one-dimensional screen world, where we're kind of sucked in and get into panic, it almost becomes a job of having to consume media. When we discover a media that's audio, whether it's a radio program or a podcast, no medium gets that kind of investment where you say to yourself, oh, I will listen to that later. Or perhaps I'll even listen to that now. You make a picture of really when you are going to be consuming that medium. So audio is coming back in the fold. Not that everyone is going to be abandoning and deserting other media, but it's about impact, isn't it?
And just finally and just quickly, is there one particular program or podcast that is exciting you right now? You don't have to name a Monocle Radio program. We're generous like that. Although, if you want to, obviously, go right ahead.
Well, I think anything that has a music-wise, my favourite would be Music 6 from the BBC. That's a real discovery whenever you listen to it. And of course, I'm a major fan of Monocle. So I'm here, obviously.
Darryl von Daniken, thank you very much for joining us here on The Globalist. That is all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Hassan Anderson and Tom Webb, our researcher Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there is more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday London time. The Globalist will be back again live from Zurich at the same time tomorrow. I'm Andrew Mueller. Thanks for tuning in.